And while I'm optimistic that Florida can get back, I think it's time to acknowledge that this might be a tougher job than most people realize, even though that seems to be saying the quiet thing out loud. Hello and welcome. It is a Monday edition of Always College Football. We are heading into week 4. I told my wife last night, I'm like, can you believe that it is week 4 already? I feel like the season just started, and yet week 4 is upon us. In just a couple days, we're going to be diving into some conference matchups. The non-conference is almost done, thank God. But we do have some takeaways from this past weekend. That's what we'll hit today. I'm Greg McElroy. Thanks for being here. It's really been a lot of fun to kind of figure out the way that we should program the show so that you get the most out of it. It's been a work in progress, but we've settled on our Sunday show being kind of an emotional streaming consciousness reaction. Monday is where we can dive a little deeper. We can actually take a step back and really kind of react to what we learned because we've had more time to evaluate. We kind of refer to it as upon further review. So either our conclusions that we jumped to yesterday are accurate or they are inaccurate because we were emotional. That's kind of where we'll live. So today we'll go into the 10 things we learned from this past weekend's events. And since we are approaching the end of the non-conference slate, we felt, and frankly, with last weekend's matchups being kind of a mixed bag of quality, we felt like we might be a slightly better served to look at it from a little bigger picture. So you'll notice today, we'll hit the group of 5. We'll hit the ACC, Big 12, SEC, and the Big 10, and we'll give you kind of a report card, so to speak, based on what we've learned up to this point. I also have a pretty interesting takeaway about backup quarterbacks, which you probably don't want to miss, but you might have to wait for because it's at the end of the show. So without much further ado, let's dive in. Our 10 things we learned after week 3 of college football. Takeaway number 1, LSU and South Carolina set the tone for the day. Now, LSU trailed by as many as 17 points. They ultimately went on to win. If those are not aware, that they won the game. It was amazing. 36-33 on the road at South Carolina. And there was a chance there at the end for South Carolina to win it, but the field goal sailed just a little bit left. It looked like it was going to be good. Felt bad that that kick wasn't good because that kicker, man, he hit it good. Just ended up a hair left. A 17-point deficit is tied for the largest comeback on the road by LSU in the last 25 years. And these comebacks are starting to become kind of a regular occurrence for the Bayou Bengals. They have 8 wins when trailing by 10 plus points since Brian Kelly became the head coach in 2022. That's the most in the FBS since that time frame. So if you get LSU down, you better finish, or else you're going to open the door for the possible backdoor victory that we've seen multiple times. Garrett Nussmeier, I am so impressed with this young man's toughness. He took a lot of hits. He continued to get back up, and he was under pressure, felt like on almost every drop back. He was pressured 17 times. So not only is this a reflection on his toughness, it's also a reflection on the LSU offensive line maybe not being as good as advertised. And it's also a tip of the cap to the South Carolina defensive line, which was amazing. He was pressured on 41% of his dropbacks. He had only been pressured on 15% of his dropbacks in the first 2 games. So we know for sure that South Carolina is legit along the defensive line. We also know for sure that Lenora Sellers played great when he was in there. I hate that he was banged up. I hate that he had the ankle injury there at the end of the first half. He finished with 113 passing yards, 88 rushing yards, and a couple touchdowns, including the 75-yard touchdown run, which is the longest rushing touchdown by a quarterback in South Carolina history. I think Dowell Loggins did a pretty good job of figuring out, all right, here's how we can attack them. Quarterback run game is something that's beneficial to us. I thought Rocket Sanders looked faster in this game at running back than he had at any point in the first 2 games, excuse me. It's been documented that maybe, a little bit bigger, more of a power back this year than he was at Arkansas. Well, he looked like he had that Arkansas speed back when he was running away from defenders at LSU this past weekend. Couple takeaways. One, LSU's defense is still not where it needs to be. I thought they did a decent job of creating pressure against Lenore Sellers and Robbie Ashford when he was in there. So it did kind of like the pressure plan, but the run fits continue to be a problem. That was a big problem for them last year. And now I still think it's going to be an issue moving forward. Takeaway number 2. Everybody continues to talk about the officiating in this game. I was actually listening to a show that I very much enjoy. Listening to a show this morning during my workout, and I was sitting there and I heard the host of this show complain about the officiating and yet not cite specific examples in the game that he didn't like. So I figured we can do that on this show. Why? Because it's our Monday show and we can dive a touch deeper. The first play that most people are up in arms about was the pick 6, where it was flagged because of the horse collar tackle on Kyle Kennard against Garrett Nussmeier. He pulled him down from behind. A couple years back, the horse collar tackle would not have been a penalty inside the tackle box, but it's now become one after this past off season. It's a player safety issue. Whether you agree with it or disagree with it, the call was correct. They grabbed him by the nameplate. He pulled him down backwards. That's a horse collar tackle. I hate that it took points off the board for South Carolina. I don't have a dog in the fight. I really could care less who won the game. I just wanted to watch an entertaining game. I hate it that it took points off the board for South Carolina, but the call was officiated correctly, and that was confirmed in conversations with those that are familiar about the rule book. The next call that many people were very frustrated was the illegal blindside block against Garrett Nussmeier on the pick 6. That play was also officiated correctly, according to my sources. So here's what I would say. The blindside block, was it one of those where he cleans the clock, right? The obvious blindside block where a guy's returning it this way and a blocker is going this way, right? So let's say the return man is going from right to left, the blocker is going from left to right. You might not like it, but it was correctly officiated. It was an illegal blindside block because the runner or the ball carrier was going in an opposite direction as the guy that initiated the contact on the block. So you don't have to like it. And I hate that it resulted in a huge turning point in the game. Would have been a massive back-breaking interception to the house for LSU, but it was officiated correctly. So while everybody is critical of the officials, there were other parts of the game that I did not agree with. And I know South Carolina had 120 or however many penalties they have. LSU actually had 9 penalties themselves. So I know that people are very frustrated by the way it was officiated, but the 2 most impactful plays of the game were officiated correctly. That's all I would say about that. So the other thing I would say about officiating, and this kind of goes on this show, we don't complain about officiating. Just being honest, fans are more than welcome to. Message boards are there for you. If you want to talk and harp about officiating, there's a million places to do that. And there's a million different hosts that will placate to you by saying how bad the officials were. What I would say, because I come from the personal accountability school that Nick Saban used, what I would say is that if you leave it up to the officials, that is on you. That's all I would say. LSU and South Carolina played a great game. Had South Carolina done some things in the game, it would not have resulted in a play or 2 here or there that were decided by the officials. That's all I would say about that. So that's how I operate. You can totally disagree. You can say I'm crazy. That's fine. Totally support that. We will agree to disagree. Takeaway number 2. Alabama offensively is playing to their strength. Now, Jalen Milroe accounted for 5 touchdowns in the game against Wisconsin. He's now responsible for 14 touchdowns this year. That's the most by any SEC player in their first 3 games over the last 20 years. Kyle Trask did it. Matt Corral did it. That was in 2020 and 2021, respectively. The other thing that's been amazing is Ryan Williams, who is just a freshman that declared early, now in college. Pretty amazing what he's able to do now as a 17-year-old kid. I mean, the fact that Nick Saban is comparing him to Amari Cooper is truly amazing. He's the second Alabama player in the last 25 years to record a touchdown in each of the team's first 3 games of the year. The only other guy that did that was Jerry Jeudy back in 2018. His quarterback was Tua Tagovailoa. So very intriguing performances by a young player. The other thing I would say about Alabama is their offensive line is going, I think this year, going to be a strength. Now you're going to say, well, what about the performance against South Florida? They were not at 100% against South Florida. They had left guard playing left tackle. They had their backup right tackle in there. It was kind of a mess, frankly. It was terrible. Way too much pressure, way too many penalties. Well, now Caden Proctor is back at left tackle, which has allowed Tyler Booker to play his natural position of left guard. They've inserted Pritchett into the lineup at right tackle, which is encouraging. And you still have a really, really good duo on the interior in addition to Booker with Parker Brailsford and Jaden Roberts. So we are in a really good spot if you're Alabama. You look at where they're at, guard to guard, excellent. Right tackle, still a question mark. Left tackle is vastly improved. They're playing to their strength by running the football. You got to be excited if you are Alabama or an Alabama fan. The other thing I'd say too, last year's staff, it seemed like they were trying to force a square peg into a round hole. Jalen Milroe is not going to be a guy that drops back and carves you up with efficiency in the passing game. That's not going to be who he is. The underneath accuracy, the intermediate accuracy, there's going to be some misses. And that's okay, because there are not many players in the country that are as dynamic as he is in the run game. So if it requires Jalen Milroe to take off and have 10, 12, 15 designed quarterback runs every game, so be it. That plays into Alabama's strength offensively. So super encouraged by what I saw from Alabama and their game plan and using Jalen Milroe on quarterback sweeps, using Jalen Milroe in quarterback run game on the perimeter, and then complementing that run game with downfield shots, which is exactly what Jalen Milroe excels at as a passer. There are question marks still. Like, people want to talk about Bama. Well, the secondary is a question mark. I agree. You're not going to get tested by TJ Finley, Byram Brown, and Braden Locke. Okay, you're not. And had Tyler Van Dyke stayed healthy, maybe we would have kind of figured out just how much this defensive backfield has improved, but he didn't. So it's kind of hard to know right now, but I'm cautiously optimistic with what I've seen offensively that this group, if they need to get into a shootout, they can. Let's go to takeaway number 3. Georgia's going to be fine, but they have to get healthy. Now, people are looking at the offensive performance this past weekend. I would say 13 points is never one that you're going to, hey, remember this game, guys. What a great performance. You're never going to walk off the field having scored 13 as an offense thinking, man, that was awesome. No, it was not. It was frustrating. It was irritating. It felt disjointed. It felt like they lacked any type of offensive rhythm. There were a lot of things, if you're a Georgia football player, that you walk off the field thinking, man, I wish I could have done this. Man, I wish I could have done that, right? We just did not do what we needed to do. That's how Georgia felt when they went in the locker room victorious against Kentucky. But I tell you this is not uncommon. Georgia's been held below 20 points on the road 3 times in the last 5 years. You know what those 3 times are? In 2022, it was against Kentucky. In 2020, it was against Kentucky. And in 2024, it was against Kentucky. 16, 14, 13 points respectively in 2022, 2020, and in 2024. This is not uncommon, okay? The thing that I would be a little bit concerned about is that the defense did not do a great job in the run game. The second half in particular, they did not tackle very well. And I'm starting to become a little bit concerned about the depth. Kirby himself in the summer, in fall camp, has said we don't have as much competitive depth as we once did. He said it himself, and I'm going to take his word for it because I'm sitting there and I'm watching Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins, Christian Miller, and Nazir Stackhouse play more than 50 snaps in a game at defensive tackle and defensive end. Ingram-Dawkins played more than 60 snaps in the game and also got a little banged up. When you are asking your defensive line, which long has been a strength of the Georgia football team, to play 50 and 60 plus snaps, that's going to take its toll. And I'm not talking just in the 12-game regular season. I'm talking in 13, 14, 15, and hopefully for Georgia, it's 16 or 17. When you get to that many games, you better have depth on the defensive side. So injuries are concerning. They have Jordan Hall that's been out. Warren Brinson, their best defensive tackle, has been out. And they now are without Michael Williams. They're going into a bye week, so hopefully they'll get healthy here in the future, but they got to get healthy, and they got to get healthy quickly. The one thing I am really encouraged by what I saw this past weekend, Carson Beck. Now, Carson Beck did not have his best stuff. They missed a couple big plays, missed a couple opportunities in his progressions. I thought he was seeing some ghosts from time to time. There was play over the middle where he could have hit Oscar Delp. Instead, he checks it down to ETN. There was a play where he could have worked backside. Instead, he stayed front side, and he resulted in a check down that was incomplete that led to a field goal late in the game. There was a big play down the field to Dominic Lovett where he could have just stepped up, avoided the rush, and hit him on a post for a big play touchdown. He missed it, left it short, and left it inside. So there were throws that were missed in the game. When the game was on the line, backed up, couple minutes left in the game, on second down after they got stuffed on 1st and 10, 3 minutes left or whatnot, you can put the game on ice. If you get just a couple first downs, what do? They decide to go play action. He throws his best throw, or one of his 2 or 3 best throws in the game, to create a big play, get them out of the shadow of their own goalpost to around the 50-yard line. And from that point forward, they could milk the clock, eliminate Kentucky's timeouts, and ultimately punt it back to them with just 9 seconds remaining. So I thought it was a really gutsy performance from Carson Beck. And I actually came out of the game feeling like, man, to have probably your C+ game and deliver a throw like that in crunch time says a lot about his mental toughness moving forward as well. So hopefully this will be a wake-up call like it's been in the past for Georgia, like it was against Missouri a couple years ago, like it was against South Carolina last year, like it was against Missouri last year. Maybe this will serve as a wake-up call, but they're still an excellent football team. It's just they got to get healthy, because at some point your depth is in question. It will take its toll on the team. Takeaway number 4. Florida State, Florida. Yikes. That's all I have to say. That's the takeaway. Yikes. This is the first time since 1955 that both Florida and Florida State have losing records through the first 3 games. Okay. Florida State's 0-3. They just lost to Memphis. And it's just really, really disappointing performance. All right. They're the 9th preseason top 10 team in the AP poll era to lose their first 3 games of the season. They're the only preseason top 10 team to lose their first 3 games of the season, all to unranked teams. I'm not going to beat a dead horse here. I'm not. You guys have watched it. What do you make of what you've seen from Florida State? But here's where my problems lie. Florida State made their bed. They did. They made their bed when they became a victim last year of the unfair nature of college football. Yes, what happened to them last year was completely unfair. I hate it. I hate that we only had a 14 playoff, and I hate that they were on the outside looking in for them. Do I think the committee got it right? Yes, I still do. But at the same time, this is a group that became the victim and made complaints and is now saying hey, we're going to challenge our grant of rights and all this other stuff. There's so many reasons why Florida State came into the season with distractions already built in, having to atone for last year, going to the portal and feeling as though instead of just continuing their process of developing high school talent and hey, you just had a year in which you went 13-1. Let's stay in there. Let's stay in our routine. Let's continue to lean into the high school players. Let's not go all in on the portal. We have a good culture that we built last year. We have a good culture that we have in place. Let's lean on our high school players, and we're going to take a big step back this year. But guess what? In 2025 and beyond, we're going to be better because of the growing pains that we've had here in 24. Instead, they go out to the portal. They get a bunch of different guys, several of which are not upgrades at the position. And they're now off to an 0-3 start. And I'm telling you, man, it's not going to get much easier because some of the teams they have coming up are going to take great pride in absolutely pounding Florida State because of how Florida State has acted in closed-door meetings about their presence and their importance in the ACC. This is going to get ugly, and it's going to get ugly quickly. Let's move over to the other side of the state, the Florida Gators. This is their 7th straight loss to an FBS opponent. It came against an A&M team that was playing a quarterback that was making his first start. And I think it was all but extinguished the Billy Napier era after the 99-yard touchdown drive without completing a single pass to make it 20-0. Not great. You look at what Florida's now gone through in the last decade. Will Muschamp was 20-9 in their first 2 seasons. He lost a bunch of games in 2013. and probably shouldn't have come back for the 2014, but it is what it is. Jim McElwain was 19-8 in his first 2 years, and he won the SEC East twice. Then he gets off to a 3-4 start, and he's out the door in his third year. Dan Mullen had top 10 teams in 2018 and 2019, and started the 2020 season at 8-1. Player throws a shoe against LSU, and that was essentially the demise. He lost 9 of the next 16 and was fired before the end of the 2021 season. But there was also, he wasn't recruiting very well, all those other things. I look at this, and I think Florida has experienced some of the highest highs that you can have in the sport. But it was under just 2 coaches. It was under Steve Spurrier, and it was under Urban Meyer. And even Urban Meyer at the end of his tenure could kind of sense the writing was on the wall and things were beginning to get away from him just a little bit. Spurrier, of course, went to the NFL. But looking at everything here, Florida, they're going to fire Billy Napier. It is a matter of time. Is it today? Is it tomorrow? Is it the next day? Is it next week? It's inevitable. It's moving in that direction. But it is really, really tough to be the head coach of the Florida Gators. That's all I'm saying. Because the expectation is that Florida has as much of a storied history and tradition as an Ohio State, where they are constantly, year after year, regardless of who's the coach, a championship contender. As Alabama, who has a handful of coaches that have won national championships, including Nick Saban, Bear Bryant, and a couple others, Gene Stallings, and then guys way back in the day that won championships as well. So this is a tough job. And the expectations are that you never lose. And not just that you don't lose, but you win a certain way by scoring 40 a game en route to shutting out the opposition. This is a tough spot to be in. And while I'm optimistic that Florida can get back, I think it's time to acknowledge that this might be a tougher job than most people realize, even though that seems to be saying the quiet thing out loud. Takeaway number 5. It has been a phenomenal year. Phenomenal year. I cannot emphasize that point enough to have the 12-team playoff, right? Phenomenal year to have the 12-team playoff, because my takeaway number 5 is it could not have been a better start for the group of 5 this year. I mean, 12-team playoff, we now have teams that are vying for playoff consideration. Of course, you got to win your conference, so we're a long way from getting to that point. But let's just go through some of the big-time performances that we've gotten from G5 teams this year, so that when we fast forward to the end of the year, you're going to have that debate between UNLV and Northern Illinois and Toledo and all these other teams and Memphis after their big win against Florida State. This is a tremendous year. NIU puts together one of the best performances in their history against Notre Dame, gets a win. Toledo might have actually surpassed that performance by absolutely destroying Mississippi State 41-17. That game was 28-zip at halftime, I believe. I think it was 35-0 after like the first 35 minutes of the game. I mean, just a complete beatdown. Now, here's the fun part. October 19th, circle that day. I don't know what day of the week that is. Let's check. Let me pull up the calendar here. Let's see what day of the week October 19th is. Oh, dang it, it's a Saturday. I really wanted that to be a Maction game there on a Wednesday afternoon or a Wednesday evening. So, unfortunately, Saturday, still good, nonetheless. Those two will tee it up in what could be a game that has major playoff implications. Amazing. Memphis goes on, beats Florida State. Huge, monumental win for head coach Ryan Silverfield. That's his word, not mine. Monumental. I loved it, by the way. Thought it was highly appropriate. UNLV, they're right there in the mix. They went on the road. They beat Kansas. They now have 2 wins against Power 4 opponents. They beat Houston convincingly in their opener. So you also had a couple close calls too. I mean, Texas State almost knocked off Arizona State. Tulane gave Oklahoma all they want, gave Kansas State all they wanted the week before. UAB went to Arkansas and made it interesting. So this has been an excellent year to have the 12-team playoff because of the quality that we're now getting at the top of the G5 conferences. I told you we were going to dive into some big picture conference evaluations because that's kind of where we're at right now. We're at the point where most teams are done playing non-conference games. There are still a few non-conference games that are scattered throughout the schedule, but for the most part, man, we're kind of now moving into conference play. Thank goodness. I wish we started it 2 weeks ago. I digress. Let's start with the Big 12. Takeaway number 6. The Big 12 might be the most fun conference this year. Now, most fun, interpret that however you want. But K-State, who pounded Arizona on Friday night, had punt return, had an interception. I mean, like they won in every phase of the game. And Avery Johnson is growing up before our eyes. Now, this is a guy that was the MVP of the bowl game, so we know he's had it in him. We know that Will Howard departed and now is the quarterback at Ohio State. But there was a thing about Johnson when you watched him last year. When he took off, he didn't keep his eyes downfield. He took off and scrambled to run. He didn't scramble to throw. Well, Chris Klein has now pointed out, 3 different plays, and I went back and watched them against Tulane, where, man, Avery is scrambling, eyes downfield, and hitting big plays. That's huge for them as they move forward. He's great in the zone read game. He had a bunch of different zone reads because everyone's keying on DJ Giddens. Everyone's keying on Dylan Edwards. And Arizona, I mean, they were keying on him too. Those guys had 86 yards rushing and 41 yards rushing respectively, but he pulled it a few times. He had 17 carries for 110 yards. That's a first 100-yard rushing game of his career. And he had rushes of 19, 13, 17, 13, 26. Like, he had some big runs in the game as well. So he wasn't perfect. There was that mental lapse at the end of the first half where they let the clock bleed dry when they were in field goal range. But still, he didn't make big mistakes. And he looked like he's very poised and mature for a guy that has not played a ton of football. You got Utah. Utah, without Cam Rising, went on to beat Utah State. Now, but you look, the guy's been pretty dang good this year. All right, he's got 7 touchdowns in the first 2 games and is 20-7 all time as a starter. But the backup goes in. Isaac Wilson plays pretty well, 3 touchdown passes. Micah Bernard is emerging as a go-to guy in the run game, 123 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. He's the first Utah player with 100 rushing yards in consecutive games since Jaquindon Jackson a couple of years ago. So Utah poised to make a run as well. They're probably the favorites still right now, assuming Rising gets back healthy. They're in the Big 12. UCF, they're 3-0. They were down 31-13 in the third quarter, stormed all the way back against TCU, gets the win 35-34 on the road. They also, in the game, had 3 kicks blocked. No big deal. They made the extra point at the end of the game was highly intriguing, given the fact that they did have some issues kicking the football on Saturday. Oklahoma State, they've been to the Big 12 title game 2 of the last 3 years. Pretty amazing. Now, you look at where they're at. Oklahoma State killed Tulsa this past weekend, and they're doing it without their best player. I mean, Ollie Gordon, for the 2nd consecutive season, is off to a really slow start. Now, last year, he had just 19 carries. This year, he's getting a lot of touches. He's got 62 carries, but he only has 216 yards. So, will the light go on for Ollie Gordon? And all of a sudden, he becomes the guy he was down the stretch last year. He ran for 100 or more yards in 9 of the final 11 games. Or will this be an offense that's maybe leaning a little more towards the pass, which Alan Bowman's answered that call. He's got 9 touchdowns already. Deshaun Stribling's coming off his best performance as the wide receiver for Oklahoma State. So that's just a little peek into the glass that is the Big 12. And there's other teams I would love to have hit, by the way. But for time purposes, just kind of staying at the top in the treetop level. But man, we got some intriguing and fun games to look forward to in the Big 12 moving forward. And it might overall, like I said, as a takeaway, might be the most fun conference to follow this entire season. Let's move to takeaway number 7. This is bold, I suppose. I don't know how y'all feel about it. Answer us in the comments where you kind of stand. But takeaway number 7 is the ACC's only hope for 2 teams in the college football playoff is an upset in the ACC Championship game. Now, it's easy to kind of evaluate and be a prisoner of the moment. It's easy to evaluate the teams based on what they've done through 3 weeks. And it's easy to jump to conclusions. I'm going to try to resist to do that. Just going to be honest. I think Florida State's done. So I will overreact to that. You can take Florida State, you can move them out of the playoff picture. They ain't making it, nor should they. But you look at Clemson, they got beat badly by Georgia, but I'm still optimistic that they can bounce back. And they were a bye week this past weekend, so who knows? But right now, it feels, when looking at the ACC, that there's Miami at the top, who went on to win 62-0 against Ball State on Saturday. If you missed it, I can't blame you. They've now outscored opponents. Their 3 opponents, a combined 159-26. Now, Florida's in that mix as well. And I'm not saying Florida's a good team, but 159-26. As a team, they've scored 159 points to start the season. That's their most through 3 games of a season in program history. So Miami is up here. Like, they are in the elites, not just in their conference, but in all of college football. Who's next? Who's next? Is it Clemson, who was off this past weekend? Is it Louisville, who was also off this past weekend? And right now, if we were to fast forward to the end of the year, do you anticipate Clemson being a team that, if they lost the ACC Championship game, would still get an at-large berth? Do you envision that? Because I'm thinking right now, that feels a little unlikely. What about Louisville? You look at their schedule. Fast forward to the end of the year. If they're 11-1, 11-2, maybe, right? But do you think Louisville or Clemson's going to go 11-1 or 11-2? 11-2 with a loss to Miami in the ACC Championship game? That means Clemson's running the table. That means Louisville can only drop 1. And there's some tough games on the schedule there for the Louisville Cardinals. Like, do you trust them that much? Because I personally don't. You got Pitt, who are, the most stressful team on earth. I mean, the Cardiac Panthers, man, double-digit deficit in the fourth quarter for the second consecutive game. Multiple double-digit comebacks in the fourth quarter in a season for the first time since 2004, and they've done it in consecutive weeks. Eli Holstein's been a revelation. Been really impressed with what he's done, not just through the air, but also on the ground. So I like Pitt a lot. But do you think they're a team that's going to run the table and be there at 11-1, 10-2 as a possible playoff contender? What about Q's? What about Cal? Cal's 3-0. And I think Cal looked pretty good when they went on the road to Auburn. But I'm not at this point feeling great about their candidacy as an at-large playoff team. So right now, I look at the ACC, and it's feeling more and more like a one-team league. And that one team, at the moment, feels like Miami. Now, Clemson gets in, beats Miami in the ACC title game, then obviously it becomes a 2-team league. But like I said, the takeaway here is that unless there's an upset in the ACC championship game, I don't see a scenario where the ACC is getting 2 in the 12-team college football playoff. Takeaway number 8. The Big Ten is currently a work in progress. Now, it does not mean that they won't ultimately figure themselves out. Still think there's a lot to like about some of the teams in the league. There's just a bunch of unknowns. You also look to their home field advantages that they have had in these first few weeks has not been very good. They have just 2 wins on their home field against non-conference Power 5 teams. One's against Kansas, the other is against Colorado. Thanks to Illinois, thanks to Nebraska. The 6 others are pretty convincing losses. Now, they do have some really solid wins on the road and in neutral site games. USC's win over LSU in Vegas was big. Penn State going to West Virginia in Morgantown, solid. Oregon going to Oregon State and winning the way they won, very, very impressive. So I look at it, and I don't necessarily care where the game is played, but you would think that Big Ten would be able to handle their business at home, and that hasn't really been the case. Now, I think you look at everything, and there's a bunch of teams that feel like they can improve drastically. Oregon's one of those. Maybe they took a huge step this past weekend. They dominated Oregon State. Very, very impressive after kind of sleepwalking through the first 2 weeks of the season against Idaho and against Boise State. Defensively against Boise State, still like to see a lot of things cleaned up, but the offense has progressed nicely in each of the 3 weeks. I look at Penn State. There's no way they're going to play as poorly on defense as they did against Bowling Green in the first half of that football game. There's just no way that's going to happen. I'm still a believer that Penn State will be in the mix as the season moves along. So I think Oregon, I think Ohio State, and I think Penn State are still really well positioned. The jury's out on SC, and we might find out just what we need to know about SC this weekend. SC will go and take on the Michigan Wolverines, who have struggled. Michigan right now, I am completely unimpressed with what I've seen from them. I mean, completely unimpressed. Iowa, frankly, on the other side, I'm a little concerned about them as well. Those are two teams where people are saying, hey, all right, so you got the top three, Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State, whatever order you had them in, perfectly fine. Felt good about those, but who's next, right? Well, two that were most common in most people's eyes were Iowa and Michigan. Well, Michigan's quarterback situation, not very good. 3 picks this past weekend from Davis Warren. They ran it well, which is encouraging. That was a sign of life offensively, and maybe that will continue. They ran for over 300 yards, but the passing game at some point against quality competition has to pick up, and it hasn't as of this moment. Iowa, on the other side, I kind of like what they're doing offensively, but this is the first time I've seen Iowa's defense give up big plays in a really long time. They've already allowed 3 scores of at least 60 yards this year. Last year, they allowed 2. The entire season, they've given up 3 in 3 games. So that's of concern. Maybe Nebraska's the real deal. Maybe USC, like I said, maybe USC is the real deal. Really optimistic about Miller Moss. Guy's completing 70% of his passes each of the first 2 games of the year. Really amazing. The only quarterbacks that have done that are Cody Kessler in 15 and Caleb Williams. So Miller Moss off to a great start. So we'll see. Maybe Illinois is a handful this year. Huskers host Illinois this weekend. So that'll be a really interesting game between newly ranked teams. SC goes to Michigan. So we're going to find out all we need to know about where we're at in the Big Ten. But it is at this point a work in progress. Heck, maybe Indiana at 3-0, fresh off of dominating UCLA in the Rose Bowl this past Saturday, 42-13. They're outscoring opponents 150-23. Maybe Curtis Rourke in Indiana can play spoiler this year under first-year head coach Curt Cignetti. But either way, man, a lot of questions still to be answered in the Big Ten. I think they'll get there. I really believe they're going to get there. Takeaway number 9. The SEC is going to pack the college football playoff, and people are not going to like it. It was funny. I was watching Big Noon Kickoff on Saturday, and that's, I enjoy that show. I have friends on that show. Mark Ingram's like a brother to me. Like, I love Mark Ingram. Leinart and Brady are buddies of mine. Like, I have a tremendous amount of respect for the perspective that Urban Meyer brings. But it's pretty seldom that you hear a lot of positive promotion coming from that show. And here I am watching the show, and I'm sitting there and I'm watching, and I hear Urban Meyer say that as many as 7 teams from the SEC could make the college football playoff. I thought Rob Stone was going to fall out of his chair. Like, Brady Quinn and Leinart, they're kind of, all right, like, hang on a second, maybe 5, maybe 6. And then I'm like, well, that's still a lot. I mean, you're saying possibly half the field? This is coming from Fox's pregame show on the field in Camp Randall. Maybe 5 or 6 are coming. I mean, Ingram's like, I don't know. It's like, it was just funny to me. I'm sitting there and I started to think to myself, I'm like, okay, hang on. 7, there's no way 7 gets in. But if that's what Urban Meyer thinks, maybe I ought to look a little deeper into this. And Rob Stone kind of got things back on track, and he said, maybe 4 or 5 guys. Come on. I said in the preseason, I think there's going to be 5. But I think there is a possibility that there's more. And let's go into it right now. All right? Georgia, people are still wondering about Georgia after last weekend's performance. I'm not going to press the panic button as it relates to the Georgia Bulldogs. I think they're still an elite team. They're a little banged up right now, and the bye week is coming at the perfect time. I look at Texas. Texas is completely dominated against Michigan. I think that is who Texas is. I'm not at all concerned about them. We're going to learn all we need to know. And look, Georgia, Texas, they play each other. Yeah, there might be some carnage because of the matchups that you'll see in the SEC as we move forward. But is there going to be enough carnage? If playoff teams are beating other playoff teams, how much do you penalize the playoff team that lost? That's kind of what I'm wondering. Then you have Bama, who had a really impressive performance in their first test of the year. You got Missouri, who against a ranked Boston College team fought all the way back, and it looks like things are going to be pretty good for them on the defensive side. That was the question mark that we had. They're down in the hole, 14-3, kind of back against the wall scenario. They force a couple interceptions. They held Boston College to just 49 yards on the ground. So there's some things to, and we know that the passing game is going to continue to get better. That's been what Brady Cook's been in his past. So you think that group is going to continue on. Like, they'll play Bama. They'll have other games too where Missouri is an underdog. But based on what we've seen so far, they look pretty solid sitting there at 3-0. What about Ole Miss? They haven't played anybody. I don't know what to make of Ole Miss. And if you can draw conclusions off the 40-6 win against Wake Forest, then great. Please let me know, because I want to know what conclusions you're drawing. But they are the first team to score 150-plus points while allowing fewer than 10 points in their first 3 games in a season in SEC history. So while it's against nobody, they've still done what they need to do and looked really impressive in the process. What about Tennessee? Tennessee has scored 191 points this year. That is 23 more than anyone else in the entire country. They've outscored their opponents by 178 points. That's the highest point differential through 3 games in SEC history, and the second highest by any team in the poll era. And they played against a team in NC State that had playoff aspirations themselves. Now, whether or not NC State's any good, we'll find out, but I don't think NC State's terrible. They've also outgained their opponents by nearly 480 yards a game. That's the best by any team through its first 3 games in the last 20 years. So they'll go on the road to Oklahoma this year. Oklahoma still think, even though they've struggled along the offensive line, have been really inconsistent, they're still a team with a lot of talent on defense. So it's just fascinating to me looking at the SEC. I just listed 8 teams. I didn't list LSU. What if LSU figures it out and gets things going? So yes, will these teams ultimately beat each other up? Sure. But how much are you going to penalize a good team losing to a good team? I don't know. That's why I'm looking at Urban Meyer's comments and think, man, 7, that ain't happening. But it wouldn't shock me if it's 5 or more. It really wouldn't. Not with what we've seen through the first 3 or 4 weeks of the college football season. Takeaway number 10. Backup quarterbacks are the most popular guys on campus until they play. And then we'll put it in little parentheses sometimes, right? The backup quarterback has become kind of a comical conversation. It hits home with me a little bit because of the national championship game that I played in and won was against the Texas Longhorns. And I've heard my whole career, if Colt doesn't get hurt, they win. Fair enough. I got tons of friends that are diehard Longhorn fans. I'm good with that. You want to believe that? Go ahead and believe that. Don't even care anymore, because that trophy does not have an asterisk on it. But I will say this. It always amazes me and say, man, if our quarterback didn't get hurt, we would have won the game. Well, here's the thing. If you run your quarterback and you fail to protect your quarterback with your offensive line, that increases the risk. That increases the likelihood of him getting hurt. It always is, to me, we look at Tyler Van Dyke this past weekend. We look at Lenoris Sellers this past weekend, Grayson McCall, Quinn Ewers. Look at guys that have gotten hurt. When you treat your quarterback like a running back and he's taking unnecessary hits, they're probably going to get hurt. We're seeing more quarterback run than ever before. If you run against defenders that are as physical and as strong and as explosive as they are, those guys are going to get hurt. And then the other side of the conversation is, well, this guy's played a lot of football, but I like what I saw from this guy in one game. He must be the answer. Like what we're hearing right now out of College Station, where Marcel Reed is generating a lot of support to start moving forward over Connor Wigman. Now, Marcel Reed accounted for 261 and 3 touchdowns to help Texas A&M snap a 10-game road losing streak. That's awesome. First career start, filling in, great on the downfield throws, was 3 for 6 for 117 and a couple touchdowns on throws that traveled 15 plus downfield. Wigman had just 1 completion on throws that were downfield this year. They also ran for 310 yards, which is massive because Marcel Reed is a guy that's really capable with his legs. That is a great example of a guy that played well in relief. But there was also on the other sideline, people clamoring for DJ Lagway to start over Graham Mertz. Oh, I've seen all I need to see from Graham Mertz. DJ Lagway's the answer moving forward. Well, they alternated possessions throughout the game, and they were far more efficient with Graham Mertz at quarterback. They averaged over 8 yards per play. and a couple touchdowns on Graham Mertz's 29 plays. When Lagway was in, they averaged just 2.7 yards per play. Okay? Lagway couldn't hit the deep ball. And that was what he excelled against when playing against Samford. Why? Because the pressure was up. He was 0 for 4 with 2 picks on throws that traveled 15 or more yards downfield. You also now are hearing clamoring about CJ Bailey over Grayson McCall. I mean, Grayson McCall got hurt there in the second quarter. Bailey goes in, leads the comeback, 13-20, 156, and a rushing touchdown in the fourth quarter. We already saw it this past weekend at Auburn, where Hank Brown goes in over Peyton Thorne, plays against New Mexico, who has the 134th ranked defense. And because he throws for 4 touchdowns, it's like, well, Peyton Thorne's done. I don't know that for sure. What about when Hank Brown plays against Georgia in a couple weeks, a team that can rush the passer, and Hank Brown doesn't have great mobility. So how will things work when he's now out there against a ferocious pass rush? Will he handle it well? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. The fans seem to know, but I don't know. That's for sure. Brock Glenn over DJ Uiagalelei. Brock Glenn was in last year and completed 37% of his passes and no touchdowns and 2 interceptions against ACC Championship game against Louisville in the Orange Bowl. So I don't know for sure. And then my favorite one so far, and while I love what I saw from Arch Manning, there are people right now that are saying Arch Manning should 100% be the starting quarterback over Quinn Ewers. The same Quinn Ewers that went to Michigan the week before and dominated the Wolverines. The same Quinn Ewers that was crazy efficient on third down on the road against a top 15 team at the time. The same quarterback that went to Tuscaloosa last year and won. The same quarterback that engineered a playoff run last year. Now, because Arch Manning took off and ran for a 65-yard touchdown, he's the answer. Has to be. Now, I look at it, I thought Arch was fantastic. Had a couple touchdown passes, had a 51-yard touchdown pass that was on a bubble screen. They had the broken play that resulted in the touchdown pass, broken defensive play to Ryan Wingo after they bust the coverage. I mean, the numbers are outrageous. His first completed passes were amazing. He produced 276 yards on the first 9 plays and 5 scores. But he's also filling in for a guy that was 14-16 for 185 and 2 touchdowns before he got hurt. Like right now, you realize that Arch Manning was 150-1 to win the Heisman. That was the 33rd shortest odds entering Saturday. Now he's at 16-1, which is actually ahead of Quinn Ewers at 18-1. That's crazy to me. I love Arch Manning, and he's going to be an amazing player, but his time will come. It's Quinn Ewers' team for now, for sure, moving forward. So just the obsession with backup quarterbacks and how the backup is always going to be better than the starter until he isn't. That's, I think, an amazing conundrum that we're currently dealing with all over the country in college football. That'll do it for us here at Always College Football. Please like, rate, and subscribe to the show wherever you get your show. And those that look at our rating on podcasts, know that the people that rated it 1 star are 0-3 right now. So everything's okay. We're okay for the moment. Appreciate all of you for your support. Our numbers have gone up tremendously. We wouldn't be in this position if you hadn't been telling your friends. So continue to do that and check back with us. On Wednesday, we'll have a show for you and a great conversation with a great college football analyst. And then on Thursday, we'll do our preview show. That is our bread and butter. So lock in here at Always College Football. For all of us here, for Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, I'm Greg. We hope you have an amazing day. And remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.